Uh, this video, I hope, because it might be a long one, is going to be about, I guess, how Christians do psychology the wrong way, but also how I get things wrong. One of the things I say is everything a person does is reflective of that person. That means you are what you do, basically. The problem with that is it leads into I am a bad person versus I did something bad. So we're gonna the we're gonna go over this, but essentially, when I talk about a moral wound, uh, and why it was such a bad idea to force me to violate all of my values and morals, by the way, is because when I said to the church I had never violated them ever. That is a fact. That's because it was important to me. That's because that was where my integrity came from. Now, these people don't care about your integrity because their integrity is external integrity. It is integrity to the church. It is not integrity to themselves. So they themselves lack internal integrity. They don't have values or morals. That's what that translates to. So when I was in elementary school and middle school, and I said everybody is what they, everything a person does is what they are, basically. I got harassed by a teacher named Mr. Head, and he was just a total fucking cock, and I didn't understand why he was being a cock, and it was because our two philosophies clash. Because he did bad things, but he was convinced he was not a bad person. Whereas in my philosophy, you are a bad person if you do bad things. That is how that works. Okay. So his goal, and mind you, this is a teacher and I was a fucking student. Okay. Became to force me into violating my values. This was another thing that happened when I was in elementary school, believe it or not, with another Christian teacher who immediately was like, you need to know you can do bad things, but not be a bad person. Blah, 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 blah. If you take that logic to heaven and you're judged by God and you're like, oh, I raped kids and I murdered people and I did all these horrible things, but I'm a good person, I'm pretty sure God's just, you can be a good person in hell. I'm 100% that's what would happen. But we're not going to talk about these made up things. So it became these people's goals to force me to violate my values, and because they were adults and had overwhelming force and were in positions of power, they succeeded. But you might go, Bobby, if you violated your morals and values, how come you didn't think you were a bad person? Well, it's simple. I was smart enough to recognize that these people were tricking me into doing it. So it wasn't my fault that it happened. It was the immature 2-year-old adult who thought they were going to manipulate and trick me into doing something when I could see what they were doing the entire time. This is what happens when you're really stupid and nobody tells you. But I wanted to talk about my toxic philosophy and what these teachers were trying to get out of my head and failing because instead of talking to me like an adult, they were behaving like a child and trying to manipulate me into accepting an actual better way of thinking about things. And I'm just going to go ahead and read it. This is about self-compassion. Practicing self-compassion enables growth by creating emotional safety, which is essential for honest self-reflection and learning. Well, it may look like just being nice. It is actually a strategy that prevents the paralyzing effects of shame and fear. It replaces shame with accountability. Shame blocks learning. Harsh self-criticism often leads to shame, which causes people to hide their mistakes or become defensive to protect their egos. Safety allows ownership. When you know you won't behead yourself for failing, you can look at your mistakes objectively and take full responsibility. Correction over punishment. Self compassion people actually more likely to apologize and make amends because their self worth isn't tied to being perfect. I apologize. It sustains motivation through fierce compassion. Intrinsic versus extrinsic growth is driven by whip. Self criticism is often fueled by fear of failure and social approval. Self compassion fosters intrinsic motivation growth because you genuinely care about your own well being. Whatever that is, I can't comprehend that, but whatever. Mama Bear effect. Self compassion isn't just tender, it can be fierce. This means setting boundaries, saying no to harmful habits, and protecting your long term health even when it's difficult. Research shows that self compassion individuals are better at sticking to long term goals such as exercise and quitting smoking because they don't give up after a single setback. Self compassion versus self indulgence. Common misconceptions is that being nice to yourself leads to laziness. However, this fundamentally different. Self indulgence seeks short term pleasure, eating ice cream all day while ignoring long term harm. Self compassion seeks long term health liberation from suffering. It might mean doing something hard now, like studying or having a difficult conversation, because it's for the future self. Kindness for the future self. Psychological resilience, nervous system regulation. Self kindness triggers the release of oxytocin, which calms the threat defense system. Adrenaline, cortisol, activated self criticism. Growth mindset. By accepting the failures is part of the common human experience. You view setbacks as data, improvement, evidence. That's kind of jumbled and weird. I don't know what's up with that. But why does hating yourself not work? Because hatred is my core emotion. It is my primary skill. I am really good at hating things and completely incapable of letting that go. Which I think might actually be an ADHD trait. I think it's one of my better traits, personally. Hating yourself fails to lead to growth because it treats the self as a permanent enemy to defeat rather than a person who can learn. Psychology and biology, self-hatred creates a war zone in the mind, prioritizing survival over vulnerability required for change. I think that would lead to extreme self-centeredness in theory, which I remember people trying to describe that I'm not selfish, I legitimately care about other people, but I tend to be self-centered, which is contradictory, but whatever. It shuts down the brain's learning center. The threat response self-criticism activates the amygdala, triggering the fight, flight, freeze response. Reduced cognitive power, that when the brain is at a state of internal threat, resources are diverted away from prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for thinking and decision making and learning from mistakes. Mental fatigue, constant self-attacks release to cortisol, which over time leads to chronic stress, exhaustion, decreased ability to focus, and long-term goals. To focus to long-term goals, whatever. Mental fatigue is something I suffer from. When I burn out, I'll literally just not do anything for weeks or months at a time. It's just kind of like my brain's defective like that. It replaces action with pseudo-insight. Punishment as a distraction. Harshly insulating yourself can feel like you are doing something about the problem, but it often serves as a way to avoid the actual work of self-observation and correction. Punishment is a distraction. The shame cycle. Self-hatred is rooted in shame. I am bad, which leads to withdrawal, hiding, and self-diminishment. Growth requires guilt. I did a bad thing, which is more productive and emotional because it focuses on repairable action rather than unchangeable identity. It destroys the motivation to try. Fixed mindset. If you believe you are fundamentally flawed, you view failure as proof of your worthlessness rather than data for improvement. Fear of failure. When the penalty for mistake is intense self-loathing, the brain becomes terrified of the emotional pain to make the risk necessary for growth. Learned helplessness. Over time, repeated self-attack leads to a sense of why bother, because individuals to stop causes individuals to stop advocating for themselves in their careers or personal lives. It prevents accountability, defensiveness, because the pain of self-hatred is so high. The mind often creates a mechanism like blaming others for denial to avoid crushing weight. Another proof that the self is bad. Every narcissist ever, am I right? I actually weirdly don't do that one. Yeah. I'm very quick to hold people to account, but when I fuck up, I'm just like, I fucked up. I don't know why I'm like that, but I just am. But that is Blondie, Stu, and every malignant narcissist in that disgusting church in droves. Hands down. Hands down. That sentence basically sums up how they react to everything. Short-term focus, self-hatred might occasionally drive a burst of productivity like a crash diet or sleepless study sessions, but is unsustainable and typically ends in burnout or sabotage. I personally never really cared about those kind of things. Yeah. That's great. I dropped you there. These things are all new to me because, personally, I didn't realize stupid fucking Christian teachers were trying to teach me a lesson by behaving like idiots and then not actually explaining what they wanted me to learn. And I call it the fairy tale thought process, when you just assume somebody is smart enough to understand what you're trying to teach them through manipulation. It is, I don't know exactly how you would explain that. The only thing I can think of is my idiot friend Taco. I kept using sarcasm on him, so he just started doing it because it hurt his feelings. But he did it to like a million times worse to try and teach me a lesson, and he did. I hated him, so I quit being his friend. That wasn't the lesson he wanted me to learn, but that's what I did. And that's what happens when, instead of voicing and talking about what the problem is, directly, like a man, you behave like a child. Now, this is very complicated if you're a Christian. You're going to want to have somebody sit down and explain it to you in a long-length form. I'm not your daddy. And no, your daddy isn't your daddy. He's an angry child that believes in a fairy tale. But this other thing, because when you think with the hatred mind, which I personally always believed was, I believed was my highest trait. What is personal agency? Now, these people, you could argue, in the church have agency, but their agency is for the church. It's not for themselves. Personal agency is personally connected to an individual. Personal agency is the psychological capacity to actional and exert to act intentionally. Psychology capacity to act intentionally and exert control over your life, environment, and personal function. It is the difference between being a product of your circumstances and being a producer of your circumstances. While often used you see, a long time ago, before these people just completely fucked up my life and then just kept beating the shit out of me, and just kept ruining everything, I used to believe the world used to work for me instead of against me. That's what agency feels like. The world is working for you, not against you. Well, often used interchangeably with confidence, it specifically refers to the mechanism of the mind that allows you to set goals, make plans, and stay the course when things are getting difficult. Now, the cinema losers call it confidence because they're stupid and they don't actually understand anything. You need to remember the loser guy in it is a therapist, not a psychologist. He doesn't know the difference because he's not that smart. The 4 pillars of agency, according to social cognitive theory pioneers of psychologist Albert Bandura, whoever the fuck that is. Personal agency is built on 4 core functions. Intentionality, making a proactive commitment to bring about specific outcomes rather than just reacting to whatever happens. The difference between the reactionary mind and a person who takes action. Uh, Remember, the entire time these people were being nasty to me, the only thing they were doing was forcing me to react instead of encouraging me to take action. This is why you don't just keep punching people in the face and go, I hope he reacts. Because reacting is an action. Forethought, the ability to visualize the future, set goals, and anticipate potential consequences before acting. Common sense, that's what that is. Self-reactiveness and self-management, the discipline and regulate emotions and behaviors to follow through on your plans once you start. Yes, I'm extremely emotionally dysregulated from the trauma. But this isn't about me, this is about other people. It would be nice to be emotionally regulated, but who gives a shit, am I right? Self-reflection, looking back at your actions and outcomes to evaluate your motivations and adjust your strategies over time. That's called developing. Agency versus self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is a word that was introduced to me back in Kennesaw Elementary, I think it was. A teacher, briefly, a psychologist teacher, talked about self-efficacy. When speaking to me, because she noted I had confidence. I could talk to anybody. I didn't give a shit about anything. I didn't care. But she noted I lacked self-efficacy. And then that word was never heard again in my life. Because people are stupid and they don't know how to diagnose people. Self-efficacy is the belief that you have the skills to succeed at a specific task. Believe I can pass this exam. Personal agency is the broader power to choose whose tasks and initiate the action in the first place. The difference: you might have high self-efficacy, you know you're good at the job, but low agency. You feel you have no choice but to stay in that job despite hating it. Why it matters. Developing a high sense of agency is a strong correlation with higher life satisfaction, better mental health, and greater resilience. Without it, individuals often experience learned helplessness, feeling that external factors like luck, fate, or other people are the sole drivers of their lives. How to build it. Start with micro-agency. Practice making intentional choices in small areas like choosing to read 10 minutes instead of scrolling on social media. Control your stimuli. Limit distractions like phones and hijacking your attention and feel reactive. Seek mastery or experience, success, build agency, tackle small manageable projects to prove to yourself that your actions lead to results. This is exactly why the entire stupid manipulative structures all failed, including the SCMC van and the fear and anxiety all failed to get me to act. Because emotions don't get people to act. They're a terrible fuel for anything, unless you're an emotionally stunted dumbass that just acts on how you feel, like a retard. Self-efficacy, and what they refer to in that as personal agency, is what is actually wrong with me. And it is the exact opposite of learned helplessness. Nothing about being mean to a person who has learned helplessness is going to change them, because you're just reinforcing the helplessness to begin with. When I got the belly girl to believe that Ganon wasn't going to eat her brain, it was through encouragement. When I got Witchy Poo to believe that it was possible to somehow get away from Stu, it was through encouragement. It wasn't through punching them in the face. That is what makes me a great leader, by the way.